So for this particular training, we're going to be focused on building a client face sheet web form. Client face sheets, just to give you a definition, they are web forms that are configured to pull in client demographic information from the client record. First thing that you want to do is actually ensure that you have access to web forms. So to do that, you're going to go to Configure, Security, Configure Roles, select the role that requires access to web forms, go to Desktop Security, and scroll down to the bottom, and you will now see there is Web Form Security. So you want to ensure that you've selected that, hit Save for that particular role. One other thing that you may see, once you've logged back in, if you don't see the Web Form desktop, it's very possible it could be basically stuck in the menu settings. So you may see something like this where Web Forms is actually kind of over on the right-hand side in the desktop area. So you would want to ensure that you actually drag that to the visible area for desktops. So first, let's take a look at a client face sheet that has actually already been added to a client record. So to do that, we're actually going to go to the client's desktop. Let's open up a client record. And we now have this button, Face Sheet. We're going to click on that, and we can see that a face sheet has actually been added to this client record, and we double-click to open. One thing that you'll notice about this particular web form is that the information has been auto-populated by information from the client record. So just to give you an idea what it's going to look like, we'll be talking about this in the training and how to do that as far as getting the information to auto-populate to the form. Now let's go ahead and take a closer look at how to build a client face sheet web form. So we're going to go to the Web Forms desktop. To populate any of the web forms you've already created, you can hit Search. I'm actually going to select a view that I've created for any of my client face sheet web forms. So obviously I have a basic face sheet that I've already created here. So to start the process of actually creating the web form, you're going to click on Create Web Form Template. Next, you need to select a doc type. For client face sheets, that is actually going to be of the identification type. The doc format, that will fall up under the identification, and that is the client face sheet. We have to give this a form name, and you have to assign a version number. Go ahead and hit Save and save that form. And you'll notice if I click out of that and I refresh my page, there is my saved form in a rough draft status. So to continue editing the form, I can double-click, going right back into that face sheet. And some of the first elements that we're going to talk about are the form elements. So these are standard form building elements that you can drag and drop. You can resize them. You can stylize them. So these are the basic building blocks of your form. First thing I'm going to do is actually drag a title. So to do that, I'm actually going to use the label element. And again, I'm just going to simply call that face sheet. I can adjust some of the sizing here. I can actually underline this, make it a little easier to read. And again, I can drag this wherever I need this. You also have grid lines available. If I click on the Show Grid checkbox, that's a nice way to kind of line things up. Next thing that we're going to talk about, we're going to actually dive into entities. So to give you a definition of entities, entities are a means of adding either employee or client information to a web form based on known data fields. In order to add an entity, you first have to click on Add Entity. You've got to give the entity a name. Typically, this is going to be either naming as employee or client. You may have a designator after that, client 1, client 2, employee 1, employee 2. So for this example, we of course are talking about client face sheets. I'm going to just simply type in client. My type will be client. I'm going to leave the mode as read only. And my autofill, I'm actually going to select active entity. So this will actually populate information based on the active client record that I'm adding the form to. You also have, for example, a logged-in user. That may be something that's more applicable to an employee record where a user is logged in and you need the form to populate based on the active logged-in user. So I'm going to click Add. And as you can see, I get a whole bunch of other form elements that fall up under Entity. Let me go ahead and save my progress. If you do need to get back to that form, simply double-click on that form from your list here. Now I'm going to drag and drop some of the entity elements to the web form. We're going to take our first name, last name, date of birth, social security, client code, and let's go through to gender. And save your progress. If you need to rename any of these elements, simply click. You could rename this field. The next field type that we're going to talk about is sub-entities. So sub-entities, like entities, are going to pull employee or client information that is also based on known data fields. The difference being that these fields are typically contained deeper within the record than standard demographic information. So an example of that would be within the client record, the diagnosis information, the medications, the insurance information, etc. In order to add a sub-entity, you have to first select the entity checkbox. So that's the checkbox right here. I'm going to click on Add Sub-Entities. And then I get this dialog for adding sub-entities. If I wanted to make available all of these sections of the client record, I would simply select all. Or I can individually select these items. So for this particular example, I'm going to select the service info, the admissions, discharges, and the assessments. From here, I'm going to drag any of the sub-entity elements that I want to be displayed on my web form. Let's go ahead and make a separation line here. This will give you a good example to see we can drag a horizontal line in. And let's go ahead and drag those sub-entities. The sub-entity will be based on the entity. We will actually be automatically populating and pulling in that information based on the active record, based on the active selected client record. Last thing again, save. Any of that progress we've made, we're going to go ahead and save that. Notice that it's still in a rough draft mode, so if I want to be able to use this form, I actually have to publish it. So once you're finished with the form, once you're ready to go ahead and use it, you're going to open that form back up, go ahead and click on Save and Publish. You'll notice at this point, all of these elements are read-only, it's kind of grayed out, and you will also notice that I have the published form. This is an example of a published form. This is also a form that I have already used. So you will notice that this basic face sheet is actually in a published status with a version 2. So one thing that's a little different about this form, I've actually used this form already. So if I try to unpublish, you'll notice I'm going to get this error message. So if I need to make edits to a form that's already been published and already been used, I can do that. The way that I do that is I actually add a version number. So if I click on Add Version, I can simply version this to version 3.0 and save. And as you can see, now I can make changes to any of these form elements. So let's go ahead and take a look at actually adding this newly created face sheet. So if we go back to Client, I'm going to open a new client record. We're going to select Face Sheet. We're going to next click Add Form, and we are going to select Face Sheet and click Add. So you'll notice, because we built into the form the entities and the sub-entities, any of that information that's contained within the client record is automatically pulling into this form. And again, that's dependent on how we've set up the entity. If I'm ready to save this form, I simply click Save and Exit. And you will notice it's now in an unsigned status. Again, if you needed to add a sign element, you can do that. That may not be part of your typical workflow for face sheets, but that is available if you need it.